All right, all right. And let me let some people in if I haven't already. Okay, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. How you doing? Good to be here. It looks like we've got a nice little crowd assembled. You have come for an appointment, a moed. I see we also have some people in YouTube. So I'm going to try to keep my eye on both of these. I have the chat pulled up in YouTube, and I obviously am watching it here in the Zoom meeting. So I know that all of you are on the exact same page when it comes to the festivals. You all agree perfectly on when the days occur. There's no disagreement. We don't have anyone with us today who knows it all and doesn't accept any other opinions, do we? So welcome. Hey, by the way, I am interested to hear from some of you on your views on the festivals, because honestly, this is a very complex, I know some people may or may not agree, but it is complex. It is complex when you consider that we have different sources within the Pentateuch which describe these various holy days by different names. There is even some overlap and some conflation that goes on where to what we think now were different festivals in the ancient world have come together under the same banner now. So there's a little bit of confusion on that. So what I'd like to do is, not that I have all the answers. I am a student of these things, just like all of you are. And I'm interested to hear some of the different views. We saw some of that this morning in the chat. And I don't have a problem with the points that were being brought up, because these things are complex. And what I'm really interested in is when a person brings forward a theory or an idea about the festivals, and they are sure, usually it comes to me like this: the Holy Spirit told me that my way is the right way. And you look at someone who has a different view, and they had a dream of God, or they heard it a different way, or but I am interested in these views. I would just say that as we get into this subject, that we all present these different views and these ideas in a very humble and respectful way, and we can talk about it. And that's one of the things that's what this is for. That's why we have the after class discussion. It is meant to be a discussion. And I know that most of us who study these festivals, the festivals have meant so much to all of us. And so I want this to be a very positive discussion. I want this to be very respectful, and I want it to be fun. So let's talk about some of these ideas. Mr. Tyler, David Tyler, Shabbat Shalom, my friend.
Shabbat Shalom. So a couple of things. I was disappointed that the Daily Warrior didn't give us any references, not only classes or papers or lectures, but he didn't give biblical references. And the other thing is the condescending attitude. So I'm just getting it out because I had to deal with it. And I do agree. The way I've been through these holy days, these appointed days, has been extremely. It drew me to closer to the Almighty, I believe.
Yeah.
Also, it was something that I found very difficult because, I read all the lunar hypotheses, the lunar solar, and when things were changed, and all of those things. I read about that, and one thing I know, what I love, what Lee Stoll said, is, look, what's in your heart. We're trying to do the best we can, and I certainly don't believe that if I somehow celebrate a day off, that God is going to put me out and say, well, no, you're done forever. It's more about life, and as I also said in the chat today, the Shabbat is one of the 10. and that elevates it above any other holy day, in my opinion. And I don't want to get upset, but I don't want to get people upset, but I think there's been a lot of mucking around with the holy days, and I smell the priest's hand in this, and the Levitical people, and so um, I I know that they are very related to harvest festivals and agricultural festivals, and I understand that, but I just don't see them having the same importance as the Shabbat. That's the most, was handwritten by God, and so like I said, just I I like the fact that you gave all your references on what you're reading, and if people are going to say things, they should have references to the Tanakh at least. And at the end of the day, I I'm 100% love those festivals too. I mean, there's a lot of memories I have with my parents doing the whole
Oh yeah.
Passover,
Yeah.
and and I think that they brought the family close together and brought us out of the Greco-Roman Christian overly Judaized world that we were in, and pulled
Mm-hmm.
us, said, hey, let's try to get back to the Almighty's ways.
Yep.
And I can only hope that he'll judge me accordingly. But I love what Lee Stoll was saying when he said, look, it's the intent also. And I don't mean you can use that as an excuse,
Right.
but I did it the best I could. And you know what? No one knows the truth about how David celebrated what he celebrated, or Moses or anyone else. We do not know the truth of those things.
Yep.
We're guessing because we've written this stuff. Anyways, I know that Karen wants to talk. I just thought I'd throw that out there. And I'd love to have a discussion with the Daily Warrior, but he's got to provide some context and some reference, because you can't just say, well, I think this. Well, you weren't Moses and you didn't hear it firsthand. So, that's all I'm saying.
One thing. Thanks, David. I appreciate you, brother. One
Thank you.
thing that I love about these discussions is this is not a beginner's class. So I think everyone here has looked into these things, into not only the various theories and, how do you count the 50 days. Many of us have studied, which Shabbat is it? Is it the Shabbat, this Shabbat? Is it that Shabbat? I don't know of anyone who is in this room right now who has not been working on this stuff for decades. I know that we've had discussions, we've had debates, we've had fights. I've been one of the biggest jerks in the world when it came to this stuff early in the time when I was learning this stuff. I wanted to fight over this stuff because I wanted to say, look at this. You can't. Well, you mature over time and you say, well, I'd rather surround myself with people who are trying to learn these and to do these things right. And that's what we have here, I think, is a very good group with not necessarily all on the same page. We might not be all in the same notebook even, but at least we're willing to consider. And I'm about to turn this over to Karen, but I was going to say one more thing. I wrapped the class up, if you were listening, with this passage in 2 Chronicles chapter 30, and Hezekiah prays because the people weren't doing. In this case, it was Passover, Pesach. They weren't doing it according to the way it was written, and so he prayed for the people that God would recognize their attempt to get this right. And I think that's so important, especially when we have differences when it comes to the festivals, because the Lord heard Hezekiah, it says in verse 20, and so forth. So anyway, all right, Karen, how are you, my friend? You're going to tell us some things about Shabbaton today, I think.
No questions.
Mm.
Well, I remember talking to you before about I was doing some research into the nope, I don't want to do that. The 7-day consecutive week outside a lunar cycle.
Okay.
Because
What'd you find? What'd you find?
I found that, I mean, in the archaeological record, it goes back as early as I mean, it may even go back earlier than that, but what I could find, it goes all the way back to Sargon of Akkad, who when he, starts the first empire ever, before that, there's no empires, there's no kingdoms, there's just city-states.
Okay.
Sumerian city-states, Akkadian city, different ones. And he conquers Acadia and Sumeria and starts like the first empire. And he institutes a 7-day consecutive week.
Okay.
And scholars think that Sumerians already did this. And you can find, but the unfortunate thing is a lot of this information comes from Babylonian texts written about Sargon after the fact. There's not a lot from the period, but you can find in Lagash, there were some cylinders found written by an able priest and king. Sound familiar? He was a king of a city-state called Lagash in Samaria, and he institutes a 7-day festival where there's no work. The servant walks shoulder to shoulder with his master. The maidservant sits at the same table as her mistress. There's this, concept of a Sabbath.
Yeah.
And the concept of a 7-day week. Not everyone has a 7-day week outside the lunar cycle. Like Babylonians have a 10-day week, I believe, and then Egyptians are like 8, and they're all kind of fiddling with the timing.
Right.
But Akkadians have and Sumerians have a 7-day consecutive week outside the lunar cycle. And the Babylonians celebrate a Sabbath, but it is on the full moon. It is once a month on the full moon. And it's not a happy time. It's not like they call it an auspicious time where they refrain from doing anything, from eating meat or whatever, because the gods are watching. And
Oh, really? Huh.
not like, Sabbath is a blessing kind of thing. Like, so the way the Hebrew, the early Israelites and the Hebrews keep their Sabbath is completely different than anyone else.
Yeah.
Because everyone else their calendar is run by a lunar or a solar cycle, and with this 7-day consecutive week, regardless of the cycle, is something that's not generally done by everyone.
So one of the things, I'm glad you're bringing this up. I do recall you telling me, or maybe some others even, mentioning that you were looking into this. It becomes very, it's a good question. Like, for instance, I saw someone in the chat during the class, they brought up the question, how do we know for certain that we've selected the right day for the 7th day? In other words, you go on the 7th day, this is going to be a Shabbat, but how do we know that that is Saturday? And then, of course, I know about the other arguments. Does Shabbat begin in the evening? And I know why we do say that it begins in the evening to evening. But I've also read extensively on the other views that it begins at sun up. So there are all these different arguments. But one thing is certain, there's no there's no astronomical reason for a 7-day week. Does that make sense? In other words, you can say, well, I know why we do a lunar cycle. I know the phases of the moon, and we have good evidence that in antiquity they also followed and knew very much, in fact, far more than we know today, about the cycles of the moon. And we understand that they were pretty close based on Qumran on nailing this calendar down in the ancient Hebrew culture. So there's a lot going on with this. But I think the reason that I'm very open to allowing people to express their views on the holy days, the festivals and so forth, is because I think it's so important. Dave Tyler just mentioned, it's very important. And I saw in the comments earlier that the Daily Warrior said it is very important to get the exact time down. And that's true. I agree with that. So I think if we come together and we discuss all of these ideas, and we do it for the purpose of coming to the truth, I think it's going to be better for us. And I appreciate, Karen, that you do a lot of that. You, like I do, I dig into all sorts of sources. I want to know, what did these ancient cultures believe? And we know already that the Hebrew culture has many things that that appear to be borrowed, if I can say it that way, from different cultures. You know, we see Egyptian influence, we see Babylonian influence, we see Zoroastrian influence in some cases. So it is important. So before I go to the next person, Karen, have you yet come up with like a big takeaway from your study? I know you're still looking into it, but what's the big thing that we can take away from what you found in your study?
My argument with the individual that I talked to about this is, the Ten Commandments say work 6 days, rest on the seventh. And they will say, well, I'm going to go from the new moon and count 7 days and then keep my Sabbath on that day because that's the seventh day of the month. And I'm like, but it says work 6 days in the Ten Commandments. Are you going to twiddle your thumbs the rest of the month because you're only working 6 days a month? Is that how? This doesn't make any sense. And, of course, they'll try to find an argument, but that doesn't, with no basis, with no background. And then another thing I do want to say, so I was reading a long time ago. I started reading Chabad's. They have you can look up the scripture and then it'll have Rashi's notes.
Right.
Sometimes they're helpful and sometimes they're not.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm reading in Isaiah where he talks about, I think he's talking about the return of the exiles and saying, those who are in darkness, reveal yourselves. And Rashi's notes on there mention something called, these people are, were exiled beyond the river Sabbatyon. And I'm like, what is the river? This is the first time I heard of it.
Yeah, that's a fun study. I've gotten into that before too.
Started digging into like, what is that river? And of course, I think it's metaphorical, a metaphorical river, Sabbath river. And the way the people come back, or the way they go to a place that God will show them, Lek kind of thing, is by crossing that Sabbath river, by coming back to that. And, I had a dream about it even before I knew about what the Sabbath river was. I had a dream, and the Sabbath river in the legend, it's a river of rocks, and it flows 6 days a week and then stops on the Shabbat.
Yeah.
And in my dream, I come to what I think is a path, and I try to cross across the path because I hear a noise on the other side. And I go to step on it and my foot sinks because it's a river and it has floating rocks. And I'm like, well, how am I going to go figure out what that noise is if I can't walk across this river? And so I test the rocks and I'm like, okay, if I lay down and I roll and I evenly distribute my body weight and I roll across the river, I can probably get to the other side. So I do that. And it just kind of made me think is, when we come to this place, we have to make ourselves low. We have to realize we don't know everything, because a lot of us grew up in a situation where we knew everything. We were the ones that taught the Bible study. We were the Sunday school teachers, and we know everything there is to know. And then all of a sudden, we realize, oh, we don't know everything. And
I find that fun and refreshing now that I don't have to know everything, and then I can admit that I don't know everything. It's really good in that sense. And one thing about what Eric, by the way, I see Eric and Todd and Angel. I'm coming to you in just a minute. One thing I wanted to say though is that this Sabbath question, the festivals too, but when it comes to the Sabbath, I would bet that all of you, or most of you, I would bet, if I was a betting man, I would bet that all of you found that Sabbath question or issue as one of the things that drew you closer to God. Now you might say, well, Well, I didn't come to the conclusions you did, Ross. You've gone too far, and that's okay. You can think that. But what I mean by this is it was a doorway. It was part of what brought me because once I said, "Wait a minute," because I was from a Christian background, and I bet most of you were as well. I said, "Why are we doing this on Sunday when clearly the Sabbath wasn't on Sunday? I know this is wrong." And it was one of the things that I think the last time I was in a church, I was already finding this out. And I remember the preacher at this church was a great dynamic speaker. I think he was a godly person. I think he really loved God and he was trying, but unfortunately, I was pulled into this. My life, my spiritual world was being shaken and I was turned upside down. And I remember he preached through, and it was about the Sabbath, by the way. He was going through verse after verse after verse about the Sabbath and how, you should keep the Sabbath and you should this and that. And I remember but you know what his sermon was titled? Thank God It's Sunday. Because he interpreted all of those texts about the Sabbath. He goes, well, thank God it's here. And to top it off, get this, swear to you, this is the truth. In the parking lot after the service that day, they were serving hot dogs, and you can bet that they were not kosher hot dogs. And I thought, I'm out of here. I don't know where I'm going, but I can't go here anymore. But it's that Sabbath question. So many times I hear people, I say, what turns you towards the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? And time and again, I hear people say it was the Sabbath. So, Karen, if one more thing, not as an assignment, but as a friend, if you have time, and I know you've got all kind of activities going on because I follow you on social media, but as you have time, if you drop some of these ideas or books or research pieces on the Discord and let us read through them, we can learn with you because I think you're onto some interesting things. So at least consider as your schedule allows, dropping some of those things there.
Yeah, I need to do that. One real quick thing.
Okay.
A certain rabbi said the Sabbath is created for man, not man for the Sabbath.
Yep.
And I agree with that. And I think that every week we have a choice to accept that gift or not.
Yeah. That's
and
right.
So I look at it as a gift.
That's right. It's like we're getting into the rhythm of the Almighty, maybe. And so these discussions, by the way, we don't have to agree as long as we're discussing these things for the purpose of discovering truth and serving God. We're learning, but not just to learn, we're learning to live. Would everybody agree with that, I think? Hey, thanks, Karen.
Mm-hmm.
Eric, how are you, my brother? We survived the rain in Louisiana so far, so it's good to see you're on dry land.
Yeah, if this house was any lower, I think I'll have to get a P-row for sure.
All of you who don't know what a P-row is, you can look it up, but don't spell it like it sounds. It's a Cajun word for a boat. Go ahead, Eric. Tell us some good things. Teach us something.
Well, the first thing that I just was a comment about some of the earlier folks and you was, it has always seemed to me from when I started discovering that there was a difference between what was said in the pulpit and what was in the book.
Yeah.
That an incredible amount of stuff changed in the book after the Babylonian exile. And I think we're discovering that the more we look at Moses's scroll. And then I wanted to jump to the Shabbat, and I've forgotten which of these articles or creeds or whatever they called it back, Constantinople maybe, time, where they said, the church fathers, quote unquote, said, we're not changing the Sabbath. We're just changing the day of worship to the venerable day of the sun, S-U-N. And that always has bugged me
As it
not
as
out.
it should, as it should,
Yeah,
I might add.
it bugged me then, and I didn't really figure it out for a while, and it doesn't bug me anymore because now I know where they're coming from.
Yeah,
The same thing as Babylonia. And for some of the other arguments is the uh, confusing of the language at the Tower of Babel seemed to be prophetic in my mind to what has gone on in history ever since out of Babylon. And I think there's some good books that were called something like that.
yeah,
But it you can relate everything however you want to ancient civilizations, but it all came from the original Hebrew civilization that was Abrahamic faith, basically, until they tried what Nimrod wanted to do, and then there we go.
yeah.
So that mixing has always been fascinating to me. That's my comments.
Hey, good comments. I appreciate you, brother Eric. Good to see you again. Todd and Angel, how are you? It's nice to have you with us. Teach us something good today.
Shabbat Shalom, Ross.
Hey, Shabbat Shalom.
Just a side note here. You mentioned last week about somebody mentioning the Elijah sacrifice.
Yes.
That was me.
Okay. All right. Hey, good question.
But I did not respond with "Don't tell anybody" or "Don't say anything." That wasn't me. That's somebody else that answered that one.
Okay. All right.
But the feast and festivals, we've been kind of questioning ourselves as far as like what you say about how Jehovah signs off.
Yeah.
And it's funny that the Sukkot is really the only one that he signs off on, but yet it's still mentioned, throughout the Tanakh, which we ourselves are still kind of struggling with, especially since it seems like they throw sacrifices in there, and we're kind of in the same boat too. It's like we're not really sure sacrifices was originally in there, and that's kind of something that we're struggling with as far as, because you go through your whole life learning one certain thing or whatever, and it's kind of hard to get rid of it just like that snap of a finger.
Yeah.
And somebody mentioned last week about taking the Bible and like redacting certain things in it that just didn't make sense, and that gave me an idea to print off Leviticus and start redacting just out of curiosity.
Yeah.
And fortunately, the first 17 chapters didn't make the cut.
Right.
Because it seems to me, like I was telling her, it's almost like the first 17 verses is like the priest kind of gave you the recipes of how they like their food cooked.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me it's almost like they're doing that with the feast and festivals, is that they like things a certain way as well. But I don't know. It's interesting the parallel you gave with Exodus, and I looked those up too. I did the 3 columns like you said.
Yeah.
And was looking into that during the break and everything, and found that kind of fascinating. That even in Exodus, he says there's only 3 festivals. And it just kind of makes you scratch your head. It's like, well, which is it? I mean, you've got Leviticus that says here's the feasts and the festivals. But yet you get into like the parallels you were talking about. It says, well, here's only 3. So it kind of just makes you question, what originally was in there, and then what was later added in.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like we're on the same path in many ways, in the sense that we're open, but at the same time we love the Bible. And I mean, I don't want to make a mistake, and I certainly don't want to make a mistake or cause others to make a mistake.
Right.
Years ago, as a Christian growing up, one of the things that I always appreciated was the passage in the book of James from the Christian Bible. And basically, it's not like everyone should jump up and say, "Oh, I want to be a teacher." Because you're judged. I believe that if I mislead someone, certainly intentionally, then I have to answer for that. And And so I want people to really question not only what they believe, but what I tell them. I mean, I appreciate that back and forth, because I think that's the way we ought to do any discussion. Any learning environment has to have a feedback loop. And one thing I would say, without jumping into the Elijah thing at the moment, I would say that it is no doubt in my mind that the biblical religion, the Hebrew religion, ultimately became what our Bible reflects. And by that I mean, I think that certainly towards the end of the first temple period, and certainly by the time the second temple period comes around, we see these ideas are fully developed, meaning that the festivals are by the time of Ezra in particular, the festivals that we now see going back according to the text to the time of Moses, the sacrifices, the festivals, that has been made part of the Bible, okay? But my question, and it sounds like it's your question, and many of you are asking the same question. What I want to know is, when God gave this rule book out, what did it say then? And what
Yeah.
was it that was original to the plan? Because what we see is, in some ways and in some concepts, are very confusing, because there's so many different views in there. And I'm not trying to put words into your mouth, but that's the way I feel. And some of the things that you were saying seems like we're asking the same question. If I were to look at, say, the book of Leviticus, what part of Leviticus could I trace back to the time of Moses? Any? Some? All? None? You know, those are the questions that I'm actually asking these days. Doesn't mean, so let's talk about the food just quickly, the diet. I know from living in the South, there are rules that hunters go by. Like at certain times of the year, you don't eat this particular wild game. And that's one of the things that they pass on to their sons and their grandsons. And, and they know these rules. And I think that for those who do consume game, there are good reasons, health reasons, for them to follow that passed down thing. I'll give you the example that I'm thinking of. Some of the guys who hunt, or women too, I guess women hunt too, but some of the people who hunt in the area have this saying that you never consume the rabbit. They're not kosher, by the way, so you understand.
Right.
It's never consume a rabbit but in a month that doesn't have an R. Now, somebody
Yeah.
figured that out. Well, if you think about it, months that have an R are cooler. And so I asked one of the guys about that, and he said, well, the meat is not suitable because it has worms in the warmer months. Well, that's a pretty good rule if you're going to eat rabbit and you don't want to eat worm. I mean, I know this is kind of gross to some people, but I'll just tell you, that's a fact. Well, if you're going to write a rule book for living in the South, you're going to have things like that. And I think some, and I'm not diminishing, people know that I love the Bible, but I think some of the rules that we have accumulated over time, and in some ways it reads like an ancient farmer's almanac. You
Yeah.
know? Now, here's an example too. You mentioned Sukkot. If I was a Hebrew in the ancient world and my forefathers had been saved from Egypt and spent time in the wilderness, I could see being in a room and said, how do we commemorate this? You know, well, we could live in tents. You know, we could live in temporary dwellings, you know. So does that mean it came from God, or does it have to come from God? I think some of these ideas, very good ideas that just developed over time. So I'm not answering necessarily any of the questions you brought forward, but those are some
Right.
of my thoughts.
Well, a little side note that I kind of wrote when you were going on with the lesson earlier was, uh, on the what they call the high holy days,
Yeah.
the Sabbaths, is there is no work to be done whatsoever. But they say that but you can do the work of slaughtering an animal and draining the blood and doing all that preparation, which is hard work to do anyway and everything. So you can offer the sacrifice. So where's the rest in that?
Yeah.
So that's some of the questions that we have. It's just it doesn't add up. If you take that out, such as in verse 8, it starts off with the sacrifice. And then on the seventh day should be a holy convocation. But if you read 7 and 8 together and remove the sacrifice, it flows together.
Yeah.
And it just kind of makes you wonder, how much has been changed, because it does say, in the prophets, the lying pen of the scribes.
Absolutely.
And Yeshua basically came to teach Torah the correct way. And it was interesting that he just completely disassembled the temple when it came to the sacrifices. And it just really makes you wonder. It really does.
Yep. And especially we have an expert too deep in the line with his hand raised. Maybe he'll touch on this when we get to him, but he has to wait. But
leave it to James.
But but we'll let him come in as a cleanup batter on this subject. But the Hebrew gospel, we have evidence that the Hebrew gospel that Yeshua actually said, and I'm paraphrasing, stop the sacrificing. If you don't cease the sacrificing, then I think he said this place will be destroyed, and that's exactly what happened, right?
Yeah.
So people can argue and debate all they want to, but that is interesting. But he wouldn't be, if somebody says, well, I don't care what Jesus said. Well, it's not, then you don't have to. Let's look at Micah. How about Micah chapter 3, verse 12? He said, this place is going to be like a plowed field, right?
Yep.
I mean, that's pretty strong. They almost killed him when he said that. Jeremiah said the same thing. They tried to kill him. Jesus said the same thing, and they did kill him. So there you have it. I mean, what here? And here's one more point, and then I'm gonna let Josh go. But if you think about it, the whole sacrificial system, the cult, if it was needed or wanted, don't you think that we would have it by now? I mean, it seems,
And the priesthood too.
Yeah. I mean, I just followed and taught a class not long ago on the red heifer. I've been part of this movement for a long, long time, and it's every few years people said, "Oh, they have the red heifer. It's gonna happen this time, Ross. You don't believe it, but it's gonna happen." And I always say, "Well, just wait. I've seen Bessie grow white hairs where she's not supposed to have them, time and time again."
Well, I'll make mention one last thing
Yeah.
before I go. I had a very interesting conversation a couple of months ago with a Jehovah's Witness, and we were discussing what is probably added in and what is not. What is the original writings. And of course, he was about to have a conniption.
Yeah.
But like I told him, I said, well, let me just ask you this. I said, now it does say when he gives the feasts and the festivals and the commandments and everything, he said, this is forever throughout your generations.
Right.
Yeshua said, not one jot, not one tittle of the law will be changed. So then I looked at him kind of funny, and I asked him, I said, so if one thing is not supposed to be changed out of the law till all is completed, what 3 things are missing right now? He couldn't give me an answer.
Yeah.
I said sacrifices, temple, and the priesthood. So does that make you wonder, or does that make you wonder?
Hey, I'm going to tell you what, Todd, I can tell you right now that talking like that with people puts a big target on you. That's happened to me. It sounds like some stuff I would stir up.
I mean, I was nice to him about it.
Oh, yeah.
Told him, I don't want you to question your faith or anything, but I'm just throwing that to you. If those 3 things are not supposed to be changed until all is fulfilled, then why aren't they here?
That's right. Hey, it's I'm glad to make the connection now, and I am not going to just skip over this Elijah thing. Believe me, that is coming. It's in the works, so stay tuned. But
look forward to it.
Hey, it's a pleasure. I'm glad you guys are with us. So hang tight. Let me get a couple of these other questions, and we'll come back to you if we have time.
Pleasure, my brother. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, Joshua.
Hello, how are y'all?
I like the background, man. It's got sort of a festivals of the Lord motif going. I like that.
That's what I was feeling. I was feeling kind of, celestial, talking about all the, the lunar solar stuff. So this is where my mind was going. You know, when you start telling the story about the Louisiana folks and not to eat rabbits certain times of the year,
Yep.
I start thinking about animal sacrifices and what their original, you know, what what they originally were supposed to be. So you were talking last week about Leviticus 19. You touched a little bit on this the last couple of weeks from the last couple of Sabbath studies. And I was wondering what the Dead Sea Scrolls had to say about this, because I know that we've got sections of Leviticus contained within those fragments. And sure enough, we've got a section here in Leviticus 19 from the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it's 19:3 through 8. And it touches on some animal sacrifices here. And then it ends with this idea: when you offer a sacrifice, a peace offering to Hashem, you'll offer it so that you may be accepted, and it should be eaten on the same day. And we've heard this language before, but then you can also eat it on the next day. But if anything remains until the third day, you have to burn it with fire. And if anything is eaten at all on the third day, well, that's an abomination, and it's not to be accepted. Everyone who eats it shall bear his own iniquity, because he has profaned a holy thing of Hashem, and that soul shall be cut off from his people. So, I think it's interesting to read sections like this in the context of, these ancient historical writings being kind of like farmers' almanacs. I mean,
Yeah.
somebody figured this out, but then somebody else took this to a whole different spiritual level. And, when we look at things like the Moses scroll, that's not in there.
Let me just make an observation here, Joshua. You just quoted from the Dead Sea Scrolls. Karen just brought up that she's reading stories from Akkadian sources. This group is just unbelievable to me. I mean, think about it. And it's why I'm so pleased to be part of this group. We have people, lay people, as we would say. You grew up in church, and now you're willing to look at this. You're learning languages and studying ancient documents. And I say kudos, man. You can't find a better group than this. And
I
that
agree.
pleases me, man.
Well, that's what makes me happy to be here too, Ross. I feel the same way. And, I'm getting introduced to this and learning that I don't have to rely on anybody else to go dig this up for myself. And all these questions that I've had since I was a kid, I can go find them now.
That's right. We've grown up in a way. We've matured in the faith. Thanks, Josh. I appreciate
Yes,
that.
sir.
Good stuff. Dr. James Tabor, how are you, friend?
Hey, hello everybody. How you doing? Let me get my hand down here. So I had a couple of observations. Now, after hearing Josh, I might have to make it three, but
Yeah.
quickly. First of all, in Second Maccabees 2, which you went over recently talking about the ark, we know that there were two arks in our tradition, in our collective tradition. And Maccabees is in the so-called Apocrypha. I've got a copy right here I'm going to read from. It's only in Greek. We don't have it in Hebrew. And it does talk about Jeremiah going out to the place where Moses died, which would be across the Jordan on the other side. And it's not clear in the text exactly whether, I always used to read it as, he went to Mount Nebo or Pisgah. Pisgah is the overlook of Mount Nebo. Some of you maybe have been there, as I have. But it really is more of a regional, if you look at the Greek. And the writer is quoting a document. He says there's an account. It's called, the word graphe, to write. Actually says a writing. So he's actually referring to a writing that we don't have.
Yep.
And he says it's written in this writing that Jeremiah was commanded to take three things out to Moab. So you picture him probably leaving Jerusalem, going down to Jericho, crossing the northern, we crossed the Allenby Bridge now. Many of us have done that. and then heading on down to Moab. Many tours go all the way to the north and go down, but you can cross at the Allenby Bridge just north of Jericho. Done it many times. And you very quickly then, if you drive south, get down to the Nebo-Pisgah area. But when you were talking today about the tent of meeting and the different uses of it, and particularly the two, the one in Deuteronomy and in Exodus, which I've referred to often and written about, the one that's outside the camp sounds like it's a tent you could put on the back of a mule, you know, whereas the so-called tabernacle, you've seen models of it, maybe as a kid in Sunday school, you made a model of it. When you put all the fittings, the metal, the wood, the carts, it's a huge, huge operation.
Yep.
So just if you're going to take this text seriously at all, and I don't mean necessarily Second Maccabees, but the document he's quoting, he does refer to a document, as I said. It sounds like he might be taking the tent that Moses pitched. So think about this. And then he takes the incense altar. Well, that's a little stand that was inside. Why he doesn't take the menorah, I don't know. Maybe it was already taken previously. If you remember the different invasions of the Babylonians were in stages, and he carried away all the precious things of the temple. And if you go through Kings and Chronicles, you've done that before.
Yeah.
It's kind of complicated, but bottom line, maybe the menorah, and by the way, the menorah on the Ark of Titus is interesting, but that's a Second Temple menorah that they remade, a lot like the Temple Institute today wants to make a menorah. They have a model, but they don't have the pure gold one yet.
Yeah.
It's kind of gold plated. It's out in the Jewish quarter for people to look at. But anyway, doesn't say he took the candlestick or anything. He took the tent, the altar of incense, and the box, a box.
Mm-hmm.
And in Greek, it's actually very clear that it's a box. It's a kibeton, which just means a container, a box. So years ago, I put on my blog, what about the other Ark of the Covenant? You can go read that, jamestabor.com. And now this group has talked about it quite a bit because of the Moses scroll, because of the 10 words or the 10 matters and the tablets, that you could, under your arm, carry a small box, right? Like a little chest. I don't have one in my room, but I picture it like, something about like this, or maybe even smaller. And we're told in Deuteronomy 10 that Moses was told to make it.
Yeah.
Okay, so most of you know this. I'm going over details for those who might be new. Whereas that gold-plated Raiders of the Lost Ark, as you mentioned last time, I think, or the time before last, that's the one everybody knows because of the movie and Sunday school and making little arks and little models of the tabernacle and so forth. So here we have kind of a different idea. Where is this coming from? That Jeremiah could take a couple servants, maybe. I don't think it was a big procession that's going to catch the attention of everybody. And where does he go after that? Tracing Jeremiah in terms of where he went. And what about the group that went to Egypt and so forth? So if you think about it, that tent, we've talked about the ark a lot, but the tent also might be the skin tent that Moses pitched, which to me has a shivering holiness to it.
Yeah.
As an archaeologist and just as a human being, we're all attracted to objects that we know were associated with our ancestors, our relatives. I carry my grandmother's ring with me, and she got married in the early 1900s. And that's her ring. Think of, objects. We all have objects. I have a letter from a great-great-grandfather, handwritten, the ink, the paper, everything is very yellowed and brittle. But when I put my hand on it, which I probably shouldn't do, but it hasn't it hasn't deteriorated. So they had good paper back there.
Oh yeah.
I feel like I'm touching my great 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 grandfather. It's actually 3 grades back. So you know what I'm talking about. So this tent that Moses pitched, I could take as maybe a historical thing based on this evidence. There's some further references to it, you see?
Yep.
And also, since it is the original meaning of the meeting, the Moed, Ohel Moed, he would go outside the camp, go in, and that's where he's having this extraordinary experience of the face-to-face, pay el pay, mouth-to-mouth communication, panim el panim. And then at the end of Deuteronomy, that's likened to something no one has ever had in history.
Yep.
Say, well, people maybe got it later. Maybe, but Deuteronomy is pretty clear. No, but there's never been a prophet like Moses. Why? Because he spoke face to face. And when he's at Horeb, he also has that level of experience. His face glows according to the tradition and so forth. So some of these things might be legendary, but they all point to something truly, truly extraordinary. So, and by the way, I didn't finish. For those you don't know the text, he finds a cave. Does that sound familiar?
Mm-hmm.
Puts it in a cave and blocks up the cave so that it's not noticeable. Cave one, and this is, I'm not saying cave one of the scrolls, that's on the other side, that's on the west side. The cave one was blocked up artificially. When you walk up to it, now you see the hole. You can look on my blog, I have pictures and so forth of these things, and some of my YouTube videos I talk about it. But when it was discovered, it was just a teeny hole at the top that the Bedouin, supposedly Muhammad el-Deeb, threw the rock in, heard clashing and climbed in the little hole. It's about less than a meter. You got to be a skinny Bedouin to and it's up high. You got to climb up and go in it. Well, then they opened it up. So it just sounds very similar to this practice, of the finding a cave, blocking it up. And then it's funny, it makes me think this is a true account because it's got some humor to it. Some of the people with him said, as I look back, I'm ad-libbing here, but I look back at those cliffs, and I feel this way at Qumran when I'm trying to show you guys cave 3 or cave 2
Yep.
or cave 4. Well, cave 4 is easy, but cave 1 and 2 are very hard. 3 and 11 have gotten mixed up according to Dr. Gibson, and the one people are saying is 3 isn't even 3. But anyway, as you look up, I discovered a desert fortress in Wadi Kidron years ago with Dr. Eisenman's team. And until you walked up 3 feet, 4 feet, 6 feet from it, you couldn't tell. As you got closer, you go, oh, this is an artificial facade.
Yeah.
And we went behind it, and what was it? A living quarters. But they made it look like, so what's the humor? Some of the people with Jeremiah say, maybe we should mark the trail because if we come back, I don't think we can find this place.
Right.
Now, here's what's odd. And I know some of you know this, but he says, no, no, no. This place will remain hidden until the time when God gathers his people again and shows them mercy. And then the Lord will show the things of the glory in the cloud that he showed Moses. Now, again, somebody said, well, I don't think that was ever really historical or whatever. But isn't it interesting the things that are picked here? Not the altar to splash blood on, but incense, which is prayer, right? The ark, which is the Torah, and the tent where you meet God. Do you need anything else in the desert? Think about it.
Yeah.
And incense is only symbolic. By the way, Josh, the Dead Sea Scrolls are difficult. As you know, I offer a course on them because the dating varies over 50 to 100 years. But there are scrolls that say our prayers will be our incense. Our prayers will be as incense And God does not want the bloody sacrifices. You get that, like in the community rule.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to make that point about the tent. Maybe the tent could be found. You know, leather will be preserved in the desert.
Hmm.
So whether you think it's magic and yeah, all that really happened or not, wouldn't it be something to find at least what this text is referring to? So I've had in mind going there for years, even before the peace with Jordan. And you couldn't go down to the Dead Sea. It was barbed wired off, but there are hotels down there now. Ross and I've stayed in them. There are hotels there and not far from where we're talking about. So we've talked about going to Madaba, getting a couple hotel rooms and then camping out and just hiking that area of Beit Peor. Now, Ross said last week, I think, when you read this text, maybe it's just saying go to Moab. You know, here's where I want you to go. Remember where Moses, go there, and then I'll show you a cave. So I don't think Wadi Mujiv is out of the question, folks.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And there is a copy Moses makes of the Torah that's put in the side of the box, at least the later box, but does it are the boxes maybe getting confused? Was that scroll also rolled up in the box, you know? So that's comment one. My second one isn't as long. Sorry about that. I get excited about these things. The second one is Ecclesiastes 12:1 is usually understood. It's translated, remember your creator in the days of your youth before you get old and so forth. Description of old age, most commentaries say. But the word for creator is actually plural, bore, and your creators. And so I've at least applied it in my life to my creators, meaning my parents, of course. That would be one of the 10 words. But also everyone that went into bringing you along, being grateful to people that have brought you along. So I want to acknowledge Herbert W. Armstrong here, because in the 1930s, he was the first one. There were Church of God Seventh-day people that they were considered heretical, who began to say, well, maybe we should keep the feast and not just the Sabbath. And it took him a while, but he finally decided that the Adventists were wrong, saying that everything is ritual except the 10 Commandments, that the festivals also should be looked at. Now, however you look at them today, I just want to say this about him. It's because of his direct influence for over 60 years. Reminds me of our own David Horowitz in a certain way. You know, they were both these patriarchs that lived into their 90s and so forth. But Herbert Armstrong took to the world publicly, the entire world, but particularly United States and British Commonwealth nations, English-speaking nations, a message about all the feasts, to the effect that today, if you go on YouTube, let's say, or Google, and just type in the feasts of the Lord, you'll get dozens and dozens and dozens of sites from Christians, all talking about the feasts of the Lord. They basically went with what he laid out as a redemptive scenario. You know, the Messiah comes and dies, that's Passover. Then you come out, unleavened bread, Shavuot is the Torah and so forth. And then the fall feasts are eschatological. So I don't necessarily buy that at all anymore, but I want to credit him because I remember when I started observing the 7 feasts of the Lord under the influence of studying his material, it did have a lot of meaning to me, and it has had to us over the years in this movement, and certainly did to David Horowitz as a Jew who emphasized the feasts of the Lord. What we're going to end up saying as a group collectively will probably never be all in agreement on, but at least we study them and are aware of them, and we don't just, oh, those are those Old Testament Jewish days. You know, we don't need to keep those anymore. You know, and kind of dismissing them as other parts of the Torah. well, the Torah was done away and it was nailed to the cross and all these kind of Christian theological things. So I wanted to mention that because of Mr. Armstrong's preaching for all those years, he affected evangelical Christianity like you wouldn't believe. They would hate to admit it, but do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
All of them, hundreds and hundreds of ministries are talking about the feast. A lot of them, it's just the Passover because of Jesus and he's our Passover. But most of them know much more about it. And Ken Hagee, for example, down in San Antonio, probably the most prominent prophetic interpreter, he would say the feasts are the key to everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he studied them with Rabbi Scheinberg, who actually was the rabbi that Betty converted under, and several of our friends from Joe Good's congregation years ago from San Antonio. There's a dozen or so people that we know. And Rabbi Scheinberg is going to this Hagee, Mr. Evangelical, right? John Hagee, you've heard of him. And he's saying, Rabbi, tell me about the feasts. And then he got a prayer shawl and he said, I'm going to pray with a prayer shawl in the future. And he quit eating pork. He's a big guy today, he's still living. He's a big guy. But he quit eating pork and he began to follow dietary laws for health reasons and so forth. So I feel that some of us who had an experience with the Radio Church of God or the Worldwide Church of God, that was used to bring us into a certain opening or understanding, at least, of some of these possibilities. So I just wanted to give him credit in terms of what I was 17 years old when I first turned the radio dial in Belleville, Illinois, and tuned in to KXCN in St. Louis. And I heard this voice, that voice that he had, that amazing voice. And later his son Garner Ted. And they're talking about this to the whole nation. Like Paul says, I'm going to try to get to Jerusalem by Pentecost, and talks about after the fast was passed and so forth. And they made the point that if you claim to be following early Christianity, it's a Jewish movement. They were very familiar with these festivals. So where we end up individually is one thing, but I'm certainly one that marks the festivals. And I guess if you would use the word Shema or Shema, what am I
Shamar.
trying to
Yeah,
say?
Shamar, Dagar.
To hear and to do. I certainly hear them
Yeah.
and mark them and am aware of them. And everybody isn't, but I just wanted to say that about one of my creators that I want to remember and respect. When we were in the synagogue at the conference, Josh sat down and started playing the piano, right? Was it a
Yeah.
piano or organ?
Yeah, organ.
Organ, yeah. And that place just filled with that music, and he was singing some of the psalms that Dwight Armstrong, his brother, he's the brother of Herbert Armstrong.
I've still got the old purple hymnal. I'll
Yeah.
bring my hymnals and I'll bring a keyboard next time and I'll play for y'all.
Yeah. But they're from the Psalms, and they've been cleaned up doctrinally so that they don't have too much of the Christian influence in them. But anyway, so that was I was only 17, and I remember telling my dad, oh boy, and Betty, we were Church of Christers, and I said, I think maybe we're supposed to observe the seventh-day Sabbath and the festivals of God, and there's a lot there to learn from, and we shouldn't just toss them out. And it's like, oh, Jimmy, they call me Jimmy. Jimmy's going into Judaism. He's going back into the old covenant. So, but that was my start in at least thinking about these things. So thanks a lot.
Hey, thanks for sharing that, James. Yeah, it's so many of us in our own walk. It's these festivals that pulls us in. Clody, how are you, my friend?
Hi,
Hey,
Shabbat
how are you?
Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
I'm good. I have only like two questions,
Okay.
small questions. Do we have any link or study in United Israel about the forever, Leolam, for all throughout your generations from of old? I mean the forever thing.
Yeah. Well, just quickly, I'll tell you, olam is more correctly translated as an age. So, like you've heard the expression probably, olam haba. In Hebrew, that means the age to come. But a lot
Okay.
of times, it really means, if you look it up and really study the word olam, it means an undetermined. It's you can't quite see it. So it became very soon in a lot of people's theology, it meant it's we don't know, we can't determine when that age starts or ends. So it became synonymous with forever, but it really doesn't mean forever. There is a way in Hebrew that you could say that, but it would be more likely to be said something like unto no end, something like that. And we do have that phrase that shows up. Hopefully that helps a little bit. But olam means an age, and that's really all it means, an undetermined period.
What is the word that is used here in Leviticus? It says here, they shall therefore keep mine ordinance.
What verse? What verse? Leviticus what?
22:9.
Leviticus 23:9.
Wait. It's not this. I'm confused now.
Okay.
So the word was throughout your generations.
Uh-huh.
You will keep these rules throughout your generations. And I don't know if that's olam or something else in Hebrew.
I'm looking for the verse. Okay, well, I think it's verse 14. And in Hebrew, it has chukat, statutes, olam, which means an age long, for your generations, dorotechem. And so it does indicate, though, that there's not a foreseen end to this. It's like for all your generations. This is so you can see. I think that
from generation to generation, let's say.
Yeah, almost like le door to from a generation to a generation. It does indicate to me that the writer wants to stress the point that this is not to end anytime soon. This is,
okay.
In other words, if he can look 3,500 years ago and he's looking like this, is this going to be, oh, it's for generations, your generations which follow into this so it does seem to suggest that this is into a time that you can't, the present writer certainly can't see it.
Okay, and another question.
Yep.
This has nothing to do with the class, but it has to do with the fragment that we had, which is on Leviticus 24:16.
24:16?
Yeah, because I was reading it in Sephariah, and it indicated that we should not pronounce the name Yehovah at all. While in the other one, King James Bible, it doesn't have that meaning.
Read the verse and let's look at it.
In which, so in Sephariah, Leviticus 24:15 and 16, and
Okay.
to the Israelite people speak thus: anyone who blasphemes God shall bear the guilt, and one who also pronounces the name Yod Hei Vav Hei shall be put to death. The community leadership shall stone that person, stranger or citizen, having thus pronounced the name, shall be put to death. While in King James, it says, and thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel, saying, whosoever curseth his God shall bear his sin, And he that blasphemed the name of the Lord, he shall surely be put to death, and all the congregation shall certainly stone him.
Yeah.
And it doesn't say, it says blaspheme, not pronounce the name.
Yeah, let me give you my take on this, and others may want to jump in. What we have there in Sepharia is what we see in both Christianity and Judaism, and that is a tendency to put one's theology into the text. So if, for say, my religion says you cannot speak the name, you can't pronounce the name, then my translation might say that as well, because I don't want someone to violate it, and I can just point to it. But in Hebrew, it's not saying that you shouldn't pronounce the name, it's blaspheme. And there, it's verse 16, it says in Hebrew very clearly, vanochev. Vanochev, that root word has to do with profaning or polluting. It really means to bore. It's like you and how do you pollute something or you defame it? You cut it, you puncture it, you do something of this nature. So it really does mean don't blaspheme the name, but it doesn't mean don't pronounce it, because here is who would have to be stoned. Are you ready? It's a long list. It begins, at least according to the priestly writer in Exodus 6, Moses would have to be killed, as would David would have to be stoned every day of his life. You name it. Yeah. And
good point.
Yeah. So that is a good example of a bad translation, is my view.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I also wanted just one accent, one note. I think that the Sabbath commandment is the most forgotten one in our age. I mean, the stealing, the coveting, the God is love and we should love our God. The all the don't kill, honor your mother and father. All these things are in the moral code of our society, while the Sabbath commandment is the one that is the most forgotten and ignored of them all.
I would agree.
And that was all. Thank you.
But and just to kind of piggyback off of that, Claudia, I think one of the things that we see so often, interestingly enough, that is the one commandment that I believe God uses to wake those who are in tune to Him. It's used so many times. The one that was forgotten, it's like the light goes off. And I love Deuteronomy 30, where it says, I forget how the English says, let me look at it real quick. Deuteronomy 30, because I know what the Hebrew point I want to make, but let me just look at this. Basically, when you're scattered among the nations and you call these things to mind, basically, here it is. This is English. When all these things have happened to you, the blessings and the curses that I've set before you, if you call them to mind among the nations where the Lord your God has driven you, and return to the Lord your God, you and your children obey Him with all your heart, with all your soul, just as I'm commanding you today, then the Lord your God will restore your fortunes and have compassion on you, gathering you again from all the people, etc. Well, in the Hebrew it says, when all these things happen, the blessing and the curse, and you call them to mind, in Hebrew it says, when you return to your heart. And it's almost as if the Sabbath is the one thing that touches the heart of all these people. I talk to people who come from Herbert Armstrong, from Baptist, from Catholic, from you ask them, what was it that turned you around? And almost without exception, it's either the name. Funny you bring up the name in the first question.
Yeah.
It's either that God has a name, and then the other is the Sabbath. Those two things went out. I would say if you tallied, you took a vote, that would be the things. So maybe you're in tune to those two things, and it's funny. I bet all of us have.
I'm with Trinity as well, to tell you the truth, which is the first commandment.
Yeah, the Trinity, you said.
Yeah, the Trinity.
Yeah, that you, in other words, you're saying that to learn that that's not supported by the text or the other. What's
That's not supported
I
by the
got you.
text.
I got you. I thought that's what you meant. I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
Hey,
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Claudie. Shabbat shalom. Todd
Shabbat
and
shalom.
Angel.
Okay, well, to what she said,
Yeah.
made me remember another point. As far as what was originally in there, what was not originally in there, and we're talking about the blaspheming, how you shall stone them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's been an issue with us as well too, because he does say, "Vengeance is mine. Don't take it onto yourself. Vengeance is mine." Yeshua stops the stoning at the temple with the adulteress.
Yep.
He says, "Let him who without sin cast the first stone." Like I was telling my wife, that's kind of a two-way street, because in order to be able to throw stones, you have to be completely sinless, and nobody obeyed the law back then, so nobody was sinless. At least that's the theory anyway. But it also says in the commandments too, "Thou shalt not murder," or "Thou shalt not kill."
Yeah.
However you want to look at it. So where does this stoning of people come in? I mean, did that really happen, or was that really a commandment, or was that just in there or added in there?
Well, there's it's an excellent question. What do we do about these instances where capital punishment comes in, where God actually, you brought it up, where God says, "Vengeance is mine. I'll take care of this, but I'm going to need you to kill them with rocks." And when we get to Leviticus 24, the strange case of the blasphemer, I encourage people to read that. In fact, I almost taught on this week, but I went with the previous class, the one you saw today.
Right.
But the idea that these capital punishment cases, it's the same thing with, if you have a son who is stubborn and rebellious and he doesn't obey the voice of his mother and his father, you shall bring that child out to the elders at the gate, and they shall tell the elders that he's a drunkard and a glutton. That's a whole nother subject. And then everybody, starting with the folks that bring him there, have to pick up rocks and kill him. Well, the sages found this almost embarrassing. Like, how many of us who have been children or raised children have not had an episode where we would fall into that, where we said, "Man, my kid's being stubborn and rebellious." I mean, all my kids have been perfect. I've never had any of them do anything wrong, but some of you have probably had some. Seth has been perfect, but the others, not so much. But would any parent bring their child to the elders of the city? So what the rabbis do is they realize that this is a problem, and they say, "But it never happened." And what I just said in a joking manner, that none of my children have ever been stubborn and rebellious, the only way that this didn't happen is to say that we have a problem with this text. Now, the way they get around this, it ties back to your question, I think. The way they get around this is they say, well, here's the reason it never happened. It says that the child, the stubborn and rebellious child, has to be a zolel v'soveh, a glutton and a drunkard. And in order to qualify to be a drunkard and a glutton, they have to consume, and the Talmud goes into all the stuff no human could possibly eat in one sitting. It's ridiculous. It's really, really silly. And the mother and father have to be perfectly in agreement when they bring this rebellious child to the elders. Why? Because it says he will not listen to the voice, singular, the Hebrew says, of his mother and father. Now, all of these things that they pile on is meant to work around a difficult text. A better way to think about it is to say, could it be that this text came into the legislation to show a child and say, "Little Johnny, don't make me bring you to the elders of the gate." Here it says right here, here's another one. If you suspect that your wife not yours, Todd, but anybody's wife, has been unfaithful, you bring that woman, this, I've used this example. I cannot tell you how bad it would be. Seth is in the room with me. If I told Bridget, I need you to take a ride with me. Where are we going? We're going to go see the priest. I think maybe you've been unfaithful, and he's going to make you drink a little bit of water mixed with dirt off the floor of the tabernacle. And if you're guilty, your guts are going to explode. I'm going to tell you now.
Isn't that almost like sorcery?
It sounds a lot like it to me.
Yeah.
And I know that people get nervous when I say that. I don't mean to be flippant about this text, but I mean to say that I don't think that was part of the original plan. And the rest of the story I've told about Bridget is, assuming she didn't die in the tabernacle, that ride home would be a bad ride home. I'm telling you now. So I think, though, a lot of these texts could have been written later by a priestly cadre whose mission it was to contain and bring about social order, and quite possibly, a husband would tell his wife, I know I'm not as attractive as I used to be, but you're going to have to stick with me. I know I don't treat you right, but you have to stick with me, because if you do these other things, maybe I'm going too far, but you get the point. I don't believe that all of these rules were part of the original, and that's just my view. It's open for discussion.
I understand with you 100% on that, because unfortunately for us, where we live here, as far as discussing things like this with people, we don't have anybody. And ever since we were kicked out of church for just questioning things, this is the only format that we found so far that we can pretty much agree with. Yes, so it's.
And please know, we love it that you're here. And one of the reasons that we love it that you're here is because of what you just said. You don't have to agree. There are people, what I just said probably caused some people to feel uncomfortable, and they don't agree with me, and they don't have to. And
Sure.
And I would encourage people. James says this all the time about United Israel. I mean, we have Dave and Patty on as well, and Dave is officers of United Israel. We welcome and encourage people to challenge and say, that's not the way I see that. Totally different views. Again, it's about having the discussion, though, and having a safe place to say, I just don't think I believe that.
Yeah, our last preacher used to always warn us, that's a slippery slope. You better be careful.
It is a slippery slope. It is. Hey, good to have you, though. Again, stick around. We're going to have some fun discussions over the weeks and years. Dr. Tabor.
Yeah, just to Claudia's question about Olam and so forth, one text that has been helpful to me in talking to people in Deuteronomy 7, as well as Psalm 105, which I talked about at the meeting, that fourth book of the Psalms. You have this idea of the covenant being commanded for 1,000 generations. I think it's very poetic, but if you look that up, and we usually think of a generation as 40 years, so this is being very literal. And I think 1,000, just like a day is 1,000 years, 1,000 years is a day in Psalm 90. It's simply saying an indeterminate and very long time. But just in case you thought that would be 1,500 years leading up to Jesus, there's no way language would speak that way. This is for 1,000 generations, but actually by the calendar, it'll only be Moses to Jesus, and then it's all over. There's a new covenant and it supersedes the old. And so, that's kind of being very wooden-headed and literal about it. But 1,000 generations, if a generation's 40 years in the Bible, at least, you can do the math on that. So we're not quite to that point.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, that argument has had a lot of influence with people that are just very troubled by this idea that Well, how long was the covenant? Now, the covenant it's talking about is the covenant with Abraham, and then particularly the 10 words. So that helps as well. Maybe not every single ordinance or commandment that might not apply in a modern situation. I've got to go, but I love seeing you always, all of you. And I love that this is a free exchange and an open place for people that love God, the Creator, however you are coming to understand God, and believe that through the faith of Abraham and his descendants, something very significant has been revealed to the world. And we're in the process of trying to recapture that and recover it and live it out as much as we can. And we stand on a lot of shoulders, don't we? I saw all the chats after I talked about Herbert Armstrong.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I know you have to go, James, but we'll let Claudie, she may have one quick word for you before you leave, since you commented on her question. If you can stick one second. Go ahead, Claudie.
Thank you. Thank you. So what I wanted to, again, accentuate.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a word.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that I do see the eternity, at least until my age, of the rainbow, of the blessings, and of the curses. While I don't see the eternity of the David's descendants on throne or the Levitical priests, at least.
Aha. I got that. And I tell you, I've seen the same thing. In fact, what we see is the fact that the biblical writers also see that. Claudie, we think about like Psalm 89, I believe, is one of the key points that really strikes at the heart as you read the Bible. This is why I love the Bible so much. Even though I'm unorthodoxical, as Shapiro would put it, I love the biblical text because the people that are writing the Bible had been told this throne will last forever. Now, they have other texts which are conditional, right? But the fact that they see the crown toppled to the ground brings great uneasiness to the people. And they actually say, Psalm 89 is the key text where it says, where's this promise to David? I mean, we're being taken captive. What happened? And so one of the things that really has impacted me over the past 30, 40 years now is the things that make up the biblical faith. Because I remember early on, I said, I want to go back to that authentic biblical faith. What is that authentic biblical faith? And so you read the Hebrew Bible and you see, they had a tabernacle and then a temple, and they had priests and they had a king. So we have texts which seem to suggest that that's coming back. That's what I want to. But then you begin to see that it's been thousands of years, and there are also texts which speak against these things. So it almost immediately we're faced with the great question as to what is the faith. And I know some of you won't like this, but remember in the book of Jude in the New Testament, it says, once for all delivered to the holy ones. What is that authentic, original faith? Man, that has consumed my life. That has kept me up at night. And what I see is that we are not far from the kingdom now. If God never needed a temple, and I don't think he did, if God never needed sacrifices, and I don't think he did, if God never needed or wanted a human monarchy, and I don't think he did, then we have everything in our hands to walk out that faith now. And so what we are doing is we are faced with the fact that it's not in heaven, as Deuteronomy 7 says. It's not in heaven that we have to wait for someone to go to heaven and bring it to us so we can hear it and do it. It's not beyond the sea that we have to wait for someone to go across the sea and bring it. But it's very near. The word is very near to us. It's in our mouth. It's in our heart. You don't have to wait. Look, I know there are people going to Bible conferences to rebuild the temple, and they've got to find the perfect red heifer. If they don't find the red heifer, they can't sacrifice because they need the red heifer to sacrifice, to kill, to mix. They need the ashes of the other one to mix in living water, mayim kaim, to make a perfect substance, to sprinkle the temple mount so that they can, I could go on and on and on. But if you don't need any of that, what if God's faith was this simple? Turn to me, wherever you are, to the one true God, and call out to God and say, it is to you, creator of heaven and earth, that I call. It is you that I want to follow and serve. I don't want to violate your commands. I don't want to put another God before you. I think that's what we really have to focus on. I think we're very near. I think the faith that was once delivered is for the taking now. And let me tell you this, you don't have to wait for a Messiah to come back from heaven. You don't have to. It's here. It's now. Good stuff. Betty, how are you?
I am good. I'm good because it's Shabbat. So Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Yeah, this has been a rough week for me, but Shabbat is here and I'm good. And I love to see all your faces. I'm sorry you can't see mine today, but you should be glad. No, I have three things, all very quick. Maybe four, but the first has to do with Shabbat and how much I love it, and it just goes back to memories of all the Shabbats that I had with my beloved husband Roger. We would sit at the Shabbat table and he would say the same thing almost every week. Betty, sweetie, how did we ever live without Shabbat?
Yeah.
How did we ever make it? And I just, it just fills me with happiness when I think about that. And the second thing is that this Torah portion, I did convert in 1993 with Rabbi Scheinberg, but in the synagogue where I converted, women were not allowed to read Torah. And so I did a bat mitzvah with another congregation in 2010. And this particular parsha was the one that we did.
Huh.
And I just think that is interesting because, I ended up writing my book on these kind of things.
Right.
Which I had no idea at that time that I would ever do.
Yeah.
And the third thing is that today is the 18th. And as you know, 18 in Hebrew stands for life. It's Chai.
Yep.
And so, I don't know, I just feel really blessed today thinking of all of those things. And the fourth thing is actually a question. And I was hoping that James wouldn't leave us because I remember he and I were talking one day about pronouncing the name. And he pointed out a Bible verse that I cannot remember where it is. I've even tried to look it up, where actually Judah, because of their transgressions, was forbidden
I
to
know
say
it.
the name. Okay, you know it.
But
Where is it?
keep talking. I'll
No,
go.
that's all. That's my question.
Okay.
It was because of their disobedience,
Yep.
if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, if I recall, it's Jeremiah 44.
Okay. I should have known you would know too.
Let's see. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah. Wait. I thought it was, I think it's Jeremiah 44. I'm trying to go through it quickly to see. Okay, here it is. Jeremiah 44:26.
Okay.
Therefore, hear the word of the Lord, all you Judeans who live in the land of Egypt. Lo, I swear by my great name, says the Lord, that my name shall no longer be pronounced on the lips of any of the people of Judah in all the land of Egypt, saying, as the Lord God lives. So there is this idea, and that's the verse that James mentioned
Yes.
to you that you're referring to.
Hmm.
And here's something that's very interesting that's associated with that point. I believe that it can be traced that, now remember Jeremiah 44, if you look at it in context, this is written from the perspective, the writer, assuming that that's Jeremiah or Baruch or a disciple of one of the two, from the land of Egypt. So they've already been carried captive. The temple has
Right.
already been sacked. And what we have then is the aftermath of the biblical world, basically. The monarchy is gone. There's no sacrifices. There's no temple. And now this command says, you people from Judah, not only does it says they're not going to pronounce the name, which is the way it's misinterpreted, but I do think that what we have to now consider is, before this point, before the end of the second temple, the first temple period, before it ended,
Hmm.
anyone, if you said, did you just pronounce the name of God? You're supposed to say Hashem or Adonai instead of the Lord.
Right.
Nobody would have known what you were talking about. That would have been buffoonery. They wouldn't have, I mean, no one from the people in the field, think of the story of Ruth, from the person who's a farmer, a man, a woman, people in commerce, they would walk by one another and say, and again, I know that there are disagreements on the pronunciation, but stick with me. If the name is Yehovah, Yehovah bless you. Yehovah bless
Right.
you. Thank you.
Right.
Be blessed in the name of Yehovah or Jehovah or Yahweh. You pick your favorite. But the point is, but then once this all crashes down, it's really a curse. You won't be able to call on the name of God. But here's
Right.
something that I find interesting. Notice also it says that my name shall no longer be pronounced on the lips of any of the people of Judah in all the land of Egypt, saying, as the Lord God lives. Now, I know you know this, Betty, but some of our viewers
Right.
may not. This is the ancient form of speaking an oath. So if I wanted to swear in the name of Jehovah, now, by the way, most people say, well, you're not supposed to swear at all. Yeah, you are. If you read the book of Deuteronomy, you're supposed to swear. In fact,
Right.
two places in Deuteronomy, it says, you shall swear by the name Jehovah. Now, how do you do it? You say, Jehovah Chai, as Jehovah lives. If I want to underscore something, that's what I do. One more. I know, Betty, I'm taking your time, but go with me to Jeremiah 4.
No. I want you to take, it's not my time.
right.
I want you to answer my question. I appreciate it.
All right, look at Jeremiah 4.
Okay.
Jeremiah 4, this is something I wish people understood. If you return, O Israel, says the Lord, if you return to me, if you remove your abominations from my presence, and do not waver, if you swear, as Jehovah lives, that's what we just talked about in Jeremiah
Right.
44:26, in truth, in justice, and uprightness, then nations shall be blessed by him, and by him they shall boast. And then it goes into, the Lord says to the people of Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, break up your fallow ground, don't sow among thorns, circumcise yourself to the Lord, remove the foreskin. Man, this sounds like Jesus. This sounds like New Testament stuff. You know why? This here is some of the most powerful. It gets to the heart of the true faith. He's saying that if you return, here's how we're going to know that we've returned to God. you will literally swear by the name Jehovah Chai. Now, notice what happens if you swear as Jehovah lives, and you do it in truth, justice, and uprightness. Nations shall be blessed in him. You know what that is? The patriarchal promise. Genesis chapter 12, Genesis 22, Genesis chapter 28, all of those Abrahamic promises say this, that in you, Israel, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. What we see here in Jeremiah is as the commonwealth, as the people of Israel, biblical Israel is being brought to the ground and told you will no longer swear in the name of the Lord when you're in captivity. It says, notice, that if they turn back to that practice, the ancient practice, and speak the name and swear by the name, that is going to bring about the fulfillment of the Abrahamic promise, and nations will be blessed. And we're not there yet, but I know I went a little bit overboard with my answer, but all of that's connected. You're going to lose the ability and the permission to pronounce the name, which is ridiculous to think that was God's command. It wasn't that you can't pronounce it. And here's what we always do. We excuse that and we say, well, it's out of, reverence. And I think it is to most people. They say, I don't want to be disrespectful.
Right.
Like I heard somebody say one time, you don't call your daddy by his name. You refer to him as my father, all of those things are workarounds to the plain meaning of the biblical text.
Right.
The psalmist, the woman who was crying out for her son who had a heat stroke in the days of Elijah and Elisha, these people use the name freely. Ruth, Boaz. It's only in the Second Temple period after Jeremiah 44:26 that people stop saying the name. Okay.
Very good.
I'm off my soapbox.
No, thank you. And just to add to that the problem with Judah, that where you quoted Jeremiah 44:26, I guess is the opposite of, I guess they were taking the name in vain then. And we're not to take it in vain. Not that we're not to say it, we're just not to take it in vain. Like if you swear by his name on something that's not true, is that what taking it in vain is?
Exactly. And by the way, in the 10 Commandments, according to the Shapira leather fragments, one of the 10 words is, you shall not swear by my name to deceive.
Yes.
Now in the canonical text, even though Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5 don't agree with one another, they both have a commandment that says you shall not lift my name for falsehood, basically. It's a little bit different in the canonical text. But interestingly enough, this is a direct, the writer of this text is referring to a commandment that matches exactly what we find in the Shapira manuscript as opposed to the canonical text. So that's kind of interesting too. But yes, it's don't swear by my name for falsehood. We even in our culture, even if people don't use the name, but you'll hear people, if somebody says, listen, here's the truth, and they tell you whether it's true or not, you don't know. They and you go, are you sure that's true? They go, I swear to God. How many people have heard somebody say that? And I'm not saying it's right to do that, but that's what they'll do, because they bring God into their falsehood. And that is the major problem. It's one thing to lie. It's another thing to call on the Creator to witness on your behalf when you're lying. That's using, because I tell you, if somebody tells me that, if they say, man, I swear to God, it's not my job to preach to every person I meet. I take that as they're serious. They mean it. Either they mean to underline their lie, or they really are telling the truth. You know, they're like, I really want you to understand the truth. In court, we go to the court and you go, place your hand on the Bible and say, you
Right.
know, I promise to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help me God. But that's a serious thing.
Right. Yeah. I was just gonna mention that. Yes. Well, thank you. Appreciate your response, Russ, and all of you. This has been a great study today. Just really appreciate it.
Hey,
So,
I
thank you.
appreciate you. And look, I'll remind the people that are here, we still have a pretty good group that's listening in. If you're interested in the book that Betty has written in the festivals, on the festivals, I should say, you can go get that. It's on Amazon, and you want to just give us a quick title, you know.
Well,
Betty,
it's
tell
called
us
Hidden, yeah, it's called Hidden Sparks Beneath the Surface, with the premise that there are sparks, bits of knowledge, things for us to discover all around us, within us, in our world, in one another, in the Bible. And sometimes it takes a little bit of digging to discover them.
Yep.
And that the basis is in the Moedim that Hashem gave. He mentioned in Genesis 1:14 that he gave us signs and seasons for days and years, and that the signs are the Otot, the new moon, basically, and other things, and the seasons are the Moedim, the festivals, of which Sabbath is the first.
And you go through in that book month by month. And so I do
Yes.
encourage people, if you want a good book on the festivals, from, I think it's fair to say, from a depth of Jewish wisdom and so forth,
Right.
that's a good book for you to get. And so there you
Yeah,
have
I
it.
do say in the description in the back, and also in the preface, that my primary focus and reference is the biblical text.
Yeah,
I do include the Jewish traditions that you
sure.
can either take or leave. Some of them, to me, are very meaningful, but I certainly do not affirm that they are all from the Creator. And I make a distinction. So it's for you to decide how
Right.
you want to view it. I'm certainly not a dogmatic person. I think all of you who know me know that.
Well, and I will just say, I will say to this whole group again, thanks so much for being part of what we're doing here. We from time to time we have people that they don't know us, they don't know anything about us, and they join, and they're used to other groups which feel it necessary to fight their way to get their word in, whereas we open up the door every Saturday and say, you know, unless I'm traveling, but if I'm here and Dave is, sometimes Dave and Patty have covered for me, and but we encourage the dialogue, we encourage the discussion, because we have considered, I don't want to say that within our group we've considered all the alternative views, but I think that we've considered many of the alternative views, and we are still open if people approach this with open inquiry, where it's not so dogmatic. You use the word dogmatic, Betty, and I agree.
Right.
How do we come together to discuss the most important things of faith, the most important matters of faith? And that's what we're trying to do here at with what Seth and I are trying to create an environment on the web that allows for this. It's as close as we can get to having open doors in a physical building, but you're all over. We have our friends that are in France, we have all over the world, we had South Africa, we have Canada, we have Texas, Oregon, you name it, even Louisiana, New York, places like that, Albania, But we have people all over the globe, and what we want to do is we want to open the door on the internet and say, hey, y'all come in and let's talk. I mean, there's no need to get excited or upset. This is a safe place. By the way, I see David in Israel sitting there saying, hey, you're forgetting about Tamar. Here I am sitting at Biblical Tamar.
Absolutely.
But so the bottom line is, how do we do that? And I want you to try to bring some of these discussion points into the dialogue part of our Discord channel, Horeb. The idea of Horeb on this Discord channel is all divine truth can be traced back to those moments at Horeb, that time at Horeb where God intervened into humanity and gave us these laws. So let's do it. Let's come together. Let's discuss these things, and I look forward to doing that with all of you here. If you're new here and you think, what have I just stumbled onto? Don't get nervous. Don't get upset. Your views are welcome. They may not be accepted by everyone's, but neither are mine. So don't go away upset. Just keep coming back. And if we can, in humility, bring up our points, I think we're going to all learn from the knowledge and experience that you all bring to this group. If it's only about me talking, then that's going to be really boring. I want to open this up and bring in all of your collective wisdom and your spiritual insights. So,
thanks, Ross. There is one more thing that I would like to read. It's very short. I did read it during the little Sabbath service last night, but I think this is where we are and what we do and how we have come to be where we are. I guess that kind of was a repetition.
Yeah.
It says, you don't learn by having faith. You learn by questioning, by challenging, by re-examining everything you've ever believed. And yet all this is a matter of faith. The faith that there is a truth to be found. It is another paradox. To truly question, you must truly have faith. And that's why actually an Orthodox rabbi, Rabbi Zvi Freeman, which I love that quote because I think we've all been there. We question and we're not afraid to question. So anyway.
Well, that reminds me, I'm going to send us off with one of my favorite quotes. And this is the quote. Then those who revered Jehovah spoke with one another. Jehovah took note and listened. And a book of remembrance was written before him of those who revered Jehovah and thought on his name. They shall be mine, says Jehovah of hosts, my segulah, my special treasure on the day when I act, and I will spare them as a parent spares their children who serves them. Then once more you will see the difference between the righteous and the wicked, between one who serves God and one who does not serve him. May we all be counted in that group who meet often together and talk about and meditate on these holy things. So you all are part of it. You make this a special place, and it's a safe place in the sense that you're welcome to bring anything up to discuss or debate, but it's one that I encourage us to learn to do that in humility, because that's the only way we'll get our points across. And so welcome,
Amen.
Shabbat Shalom, and please come back every chance we open the doors to our synagogue without walls.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom. Love you guys. See you next time.
Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom.